Welcome to today's edition of the Rush 24/7 podcast.
Hey, folks, you getting tired of winning yet? You getting tired of winning? So, Pocahontas does the rain dance, all for naught. Jeff Sessions was sworn in as the Attorney General today, and Chuck Hugh Schumer is now demanding that the Trump nominee for Department of Labor, a man by the name of Andrew Puzder, resign. That he just recuse himself, because he's so anti-labor, so anti-working man, so anti, that he just ought to quit. He ought to just remove himself from the process. Greetings, folks. Great to have you here. The fastest week in media, already Thursday. Rush Limbaugh at 800-282-2882. The email address, lrushbo at eibnet.us. Here is Sessions being sworn. Well, this is afterwards, after he has taken the oath.
It is an honor beyond words to serve under you and your leadership. You're putting together a great cabinet, which is just a thrill for me to have the opportunity to join. And I look forward to making sure that every ounce of strength I have and that the people of the Department of Justice have is going to be focused on preserving and protecting the Constitution and the safety of this country. We will defend the laws of this country as passed by Congress. And we'll defend the lawful orders of the President of the United States with vigor and determination.
And he went on to say that he thinks the President's executive order that's currently bottled up at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is perfectly fine. By the way, speaking of Ninth Circus, before we get to Judge Gorsuch and what's going on with that whole circumstance. Oh, did you hear Kellyanne Conway was on Fox today? Urged people to go out and buy Ivanka Trump stuff. Did you hear that? You know, I've had Rush people sending me email. Are you not concerned by any of this? I mean, some of this, Rush, I mean, if it were a Democrat president doing some of this, you'd be up in arms. Maybe so, folks. Look, it could well be. And maybe we'll go down the list of some of these things. But let me tell you what I'm delighting in. I'm delighting in the left being upside down, inside out, 180 degrees out of phase. This is what I have dreamed of the entire time I've been doing this program. I wanted the left to have it stuck to them every day, multiple times a day. I want everything they do to backfire on them. I want them to look silly. I want them to look like the people they really are. And all of that is happening. And I love the people in the media just go, I can't believe he's having Conway go out and tell people to buy his daughter's products. It's an ethics violation. It's a conflict. I just love it. I love them going batty. Because I am not, as a citizen or a human being, personally threatened or bothered, nor do I think the country hangs in the balance because of any of the things that Trump is doing. I'm just enjoying the left acting like a bunch of stuck pigs. And the fact is they keep losing, and they're going to keep losing. Time magazine has Chuck Schumer on the cover, and the headline, "Do the Democrats Matter Anymore?" There's a piece of Slate.com or Salon, I forget which, talking about, well, you know, you can say what you want about Elizabeth Warren and all that, but McConnell got everything he wanted. Sessions has been confirmed and has taken the oath of office. It's dawning on them that they can protest all day. They can burn up buildings all day. They can throw bombs. They can stop people from speaking, but they have no power. They have no power in the citadels of power, in the White House, in the House, in the Senate. They have no power. They have the judiciary. They've got the unelected bureaucracy, obviously. But whatever Trump wants to do, they can't stop him unless they can get it to court, which I think you should expect the president to be sued 15 times a day. That's what they're going to finally figure out is their best way to oppose him. So on balance, I'm loving this. The slow dawning on these people. Meanwhile, over on the right, they're wringing hands over whether this is conservatism or nationalism or populism, and is it good or bad or what have you. I think all that stuff's going to, it'll shake itself out. I don't see, so many people are in a near panic mode, and I'm not. And it just because of the circumstances I find the left in. Now, I know some of you say, but Rush, don't you realize that there's more going on here than just the left losing? I mean, in the process of the left losing, there might be some things going on that might not. Yeah. When those things happen, I'll tell you when I feel that way, folks. When I think something's going on, it's really. But I don't think Trump trashing Nordstrom is a problem, and I don't think Kellyanne Conway advocating that the press go out and buy Ivanka products is a problem. I just love it, to be honest with you. I just do. But you have to understand, too, what the president's doing with Nordstrom. Look, folks, we're getting close to my backyard on some of this stuff. I don't want to go too much in the weeds on it, but believe me, it is welcomed in more sectors of our economy than you would know. Now, to the Ninth Circus. Everybody was expecting that the circus would rule yesterday, and then they stated just before the program ended, right before the program ended yesterday, they would not have a decision yesterday. So now everybody is breathlessly waiting today. At this moment, the media is breathlessly waiting for the decision because they are convinced that the Ninth Circus is going to find for Judge Robart and continue to silence and shut down Trump's executive order and his policy of vetting refugees, extremists, terrorists, and others who wish to do harm to the United States. The Democrats and the media want those people, I guess, to be able to get into the country. But as my good amigo Andrew McCarthy wrote today, there's another thing, another direction that the Ninth Circuit could go, and they could send it back to Robart. And the thinking on this is that Robart didn't rule on the law. Robart's TRO, temporary restraining order, is really personal policy preferences. I mean, Robart's arguments are all about the moral aspects of what Trump is doing and the statistics about how many people from these 7 countries have committed terrorist acts. So what's the point of it? But he didn't rule on the law. And the point is that an appellate court has to have a judicial ruling on which to rule. They have to have a ruling from a judge from a court to review. And they don't have that from Robart. All they've got is, as I say, personal policy preferences expressed as questions. So they could throw it back. And in fact, Robart is even preparing for that to happen. Robart is soliciting actual arguments and position papers from the litigants in this case. He is not sitting idle. He is acting as though this case is going to go forward in his court. Not that he would know what the Ninth Circuit is doing, but the fact that he would know he hasn't yet had a legal ruling. His temporary restraining order was based not on the law, but on somebody asked him to stop it, and he said, okay, fine, I think Trump would lose anyway, and for these reasons. Now, on the court itself, the Ninth Circus, it has been discovered, ladies and gentlemen, there's one woman and 2 men on the 3-judge panel out there. The woman is Judge Michelle Friedland, and she won the ACLU of Southern California's LGBT Award in 2009, according to Senator Pat Leahy of Vermont. He said she received the President's Pro Bono Service Award in 2013 for the State Bar of California and the LGBT Award from the ACLU of Southern California in 2009. This statement was made by Leahy back on April of 2014 in the Senate, stating his approval of her confirmation to the Ninth Circuit. He was citing these aspects of her as qualifications for her to be confirmed as an appellate judge of the Ninth Circuit, that she had been given an LGBT award, the ACLU, and that she got the President's Pro Bono Service Award and so forth. So the message is we've got an activist judge here. We have clearly an activist judge in Friedland and probably another one. And the thinking is This is the law on this makes ruling here a slam dunk. If all you're looking at is the law, Judge Robart should be overturned. The TRO should be lifted. If you're just looking at the law, if you are just looking at the statute, but of course we're not. And if again, within the vein of sticking with the law, the Ninth Circuit should send it back to Judge Robart and say, okay, Judge, be a judge on it instead of left-wing hack and actually make a judicial ruling. We're sending it back to your court for final disposition. The fact that they haven't done that tells eager court watchers that the Ninth Circuit is actually looking to rule on this, and that means they will probably rule against Trump and in favor of Judge Robart, which then triggers the whole thing going to the Supreme Court if it is desired. And then we start talking about what is an expedited schedule at the Supreme Court. Expedited for FedEx is 1 or 2 days, and then UPS expedited for the Supreme Court could be a couple, 3 months. I fully expect that at some point this thing is going to get torn up and they're going to rewrite it. They're going to do a new executive order or a series of them. Because I don't think Trump is tired of winning. I think he's just going to keep flooding the zone on this kind of stuff to ultimately get what he wants. But anyway, we're keeping a sharp eye on whatever comes out of the Ninth Circuit. The most surprising thing they could do would be to overturn Robart and say that his ruling really doesn't have any legal oomph to it and reinstate Trump's executive order. That just does not seem possible given the 3 judges in this panel. But stranger things have happened. So again, the options. That, or they rule in favor of Robart and the TRO remains and then they have to go to the Supreme Court. Or the third option, they send it back to Judge Robart and say, make a judicial ruling on this, bud, and then we'll take it from there. Which Robart, as I say, is already scheduling the arguments and the hearings and the time on his calendar for that to happen. Now, moving on to Judge Gorsuch. I have a question for you people, because I know that many of you are paying attention to the media out there. And you can't miss this. There are an increasing number of Democrats and liberals and leftists outside the Senate who are singing Judge Gorsuch's praises. The most recent is a woman from Harvard. She was in the Obama Department of Justice. She looks like Marie Harf with auburn hair. I like people having a picture, a mental picture that people are talking about. She's now a law professor at Harvard, and she has been today singing the praises. She cut a 30-second video, in fact, and she was singing the praises of Gorsuch. Cannot do any better. He's fair-minded. He's a man who will follow the law. And there is a growing sentiment out there for Judge Gorsuch. And it is, I think, being helped by the fact that Senator Blumenthal exaggerated a bit what Gorsuch reportedly said about Trump's attack of Judge Robart. Judge Robart was referred to as that so-called judge by President Trump. Richard Blumenthal, who lied about having served with honor and valor in Vietnam, claims that when he was talking to Gorsuch, that Gorsuch said that it was abhorrent what Trump said, and he was very troubled by it. And it's evolved now that that's not what Gorsuch said. Gorsuch did not say that he found what Trump said abhorrent. What happened is that Blumenthal characterized what he thought Trump's statement about Judge Robart was, and that Gorsuch pretty much agreed with it. And others, Ben Sass, Nebraska, have come out and said, yes, Gorsuch is of the frame of mind that he was troubled and alarmed by President Trump's attack on the judge, Judge Robart. And this is causing even more Democrats to warm up to the guy because all they can see is criticizing Trump. So if he does that, or is perceived to be doing that, then they're warming up to him even more. The bottom line is that Judge Gorsuch is going to be confirmed because he doesn't change the balance of the court. And as we stated yesterday, Mitch McConnell is trying to get this done without having to invoke the nuclear option, meaning eliminate the requirement for 60 votes. But I'm going to tell you, folks, this is not the fight that everybody thought it was going to be. The next one will be. The odds are that the next opening on the Supreme Court will happen when one of the 4 liberal judges just can't go on for whatever reason. When one of those 4 slots opens up, and if Trump nominates anybody even close to Gorsuch, then you're going to see nuclear war. You're going to see essentially the way it was with Clarence Thomas. That was, Bork preceded Thomas. Clarence Thomas was the last real history. I mean, it was bad for Alito, but the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings was all out judicial nuclear war, and that was because he was nominated to replace Thurgood Marshall, black justice, tried and true, leftist, liberal Democrat. The Democrats thought that seat was theirs forever. And George H.W. Bush puts Clarence Thomas in there. You all remember what happened, the Anita Hill allegations of sexual harassment and pubic hairs on Coke cans and all this. And Judge Thomas referred to it as a high-tech lynching because he was a conservative African-American who did not follow the prescriptions of affirmative action and the demands of the left, and so they tried to kill him, tried to kill his career, they tried to kill his reputation. They literally tried to destroy Clarence Thomas. They brought out everything they've got, and that's what's coming. And so go back and forth on this whole nuclear option, because they're going to need the nuclear option. McConnell's going to need it for the next judge. And he may as well trigger it now and establish the precedent, because if he doesn't do it for Gorsuch, it's going to be harder. No, not in real life harder, but it's going to be harder with the media pressure. You didn't do it for Gorsuch. Well, you can't just selectively decide when you're going to do it. And that put all kinds of pressure on him. I just think if they think they're going to need to nuke the nuclear option to get future Trump nominees confirmed, just go ahead and do it for this and be done with it. But that's just me. Let's take a brief time out. We have audio sound bites on all this, and didn't get to the business yesterday of these Republican elderly statesmen in favor of a carbon tax. Want to get into that. The president has responded to critics asking, where are your tax cuts? He said they're coming in 3 weeks. Be patient. Coming up. Don't go away. By the way, Senator Sessions was confirmed in a bipartisan vote. You won't hear that in the drive-bys. But he was. Joe Manchin, Democrat, West Virginia, voted for Sessions, so there was a Democrat vote. It makes it bipartisan. Also, the Daily Caller has a story that the Trump administration is practically mailing Anthony Kennedy letters asking him to resign. Not doing that, but supposedly the Trump administration is trying to suggest this to Justice Kennedy that it might be time to go. And they make the point they're not being subtle about it. They've named a couple people who would be his potential replacements who clerked for him, which I guess is supposed to comfort Justice Kennedy that if he decides to retire, that somebody that he likes and respects is in line to replace him. That might be, Snerdley asks you what I think of this. This could be, Kennedy goes either way. Supposedly you watch the Washington Post style section to figure out which way. But if Kennedy's slot comes up first before one of the libs, that confirmation battle might be not quite as heated as it would be for one of the libs. Let me expand on this. Okay, here's the headline in the Daily Caller. Trump White House sends smoke signals urging Justice Kennedy to resign. I wonder any hidden messages there to Elizabeth Warren, Pocahontas, since they're smoke signals, and she is part Indian. I guess we'll never know. The Trump administration has quietly encouraged Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy to retire in recent weeks, sending signals meant to coax him into leaving the bench. The signals have been delivered with the subtlety of a hand grenade. The most clear indication came late Monday. New York Times' Adam Liptak, citing administration sources, reports the White House has identified Judge Brett Kavanaugh U.S. Court of Appeals, D.C. Circuit, Judge Raymond Kethledge, 6th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, as the front runners for the next Supreme Court opening. Both of them clerked for Kennedy earlier in their careers and are widely respected as serious and sober jurists. Well, I'm glad they're sober. I'm really glad they're sober. At least they have that going for them. What the heck does that mean, sober? Does that mean they're just boring and dull and they sit around and they're constantly dead serious about virtually everything that happens, even when they're watching MTV? By the way, where did it get started? I'm serious here, folks. Where did it start that people cannot comment, cannot render opinion on judges? You know, Trump has weighed in on Judge Robart as a so-called judge, and they're having cows out there. They're going bonkers. Meanwhile, there was Obama in a State of the Union address bashing the Supreme Court, seated right in front of him, for their ruling on Citizens United. And remember, Justice Alito was sitting there shaking his head as Obama totally mischaracterized the ruling. And the left applauded that, as is understandable. Obama was going after the court that had gone after him, and they just loved it and so forth. Nobody talked about the lack of decorum, and nobody talked about the breakdown of civility. But let Trump refer to Robart, a so-called judge, and you would have you believe that the glue holding our society together has come apart. The thing is, judges can be corrupt. The thing is, judges do make incorrect decisions. They're not above criticism. I understand the idea of an independent judiciary, but folks, let's be honest about something. The judiciary has become politicized extensively, and it has been the case for years. And this is, I think, another one of the tricks of the left. You are not supposed to criticize the judiciary. You just can't. It's unseemly. It's a violation of the independence of the judiciary. It's seen as a very, very mean-spirited way of trying to bully or influence or whatever. Where did this come from? It's designed to get people to shut up. It's a leftist mechanism designed to get people to shut up and stop criticizing these leftist judges when they act like hacks instead of judges. I tell you what, I'll give you another way the Democrats play this game. They'll go get a celebrity who has a very visible disability, and they'll have this celebrity do a political commercial endorsing a candidate or an idea, a ballot initiative, and you don't dare criticize the celebrity because he's disabled. And if you do that, you are just a heathen. You are reprobate. And they do this on purpose. They put people in the political arena that they think are immune and hands-off. You can't comment on what they say or what they do. And I throw that out. If they're going to enter the political arena, then they're fair game. But Republicans generally in the past have cowered away from this. And this is the way it is for judges. Look, I understand tradition and all that where the judiciary is concerned and the independence of the judiciary, but they are a co-equal branch of government, and there are apparently some rules that apply to them that the other two branches don't get, such as people aren't allowed to express opinions about them, even though they make mistakes, even though they make bad moves, even though they are corrupt in many cases, even though they are political operatives first and judges second. I mean, they already have the protection of illusion. You have a political hack who's named as a judge, and he gets to rule as a judge when he's acting as a hack. He already gets that cover. And then to further, and you can't comment on it, and you can't criticize it. But let George H.W. Bush nominate a sitting appeals court justice or judge like Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court, and all bets are off. You can destroy him. You can go out and rip him new one. You can do everything you can to stop him in his tracks. But nobody's supposed to be talking about Judge Robart here. And I know it's a fraternity, judges and people in the judicial system and so forth. And I do know they have their own decorum, sense of decorum, and so forth. But the idea that they're immune to criticism and above it, I think if they want to make law, they should run for office. But that's not how the left does it. The left uses political hacks disguised as judges as insurance for when they lose elections. It's actually, in a political sense, it's very smart. Anyway, on the Justice Kennedy business, it mentions here the Daily Caller story that even Judge Gorsuch clerked for Kennedy. And the whole story is that the Trump administration is trying to telegraph to Kennedy it's okay to leave. Kennedy's 83. It's okay to leave because we got you covered. Whoever we're going to put in there is a clone. Somebody you know, somebody you like, somebody who worked for you, somebody you respect. And I don't know if there's any truth to this. I mean, this is the Daily Caller interpreting this as the Trump administration trying to send a signal to Kennedy to resign or retire. Now, if Kennedy went first, does that change the confirmation strategy? For example, if one of the four libs, if one of them happens to retire or something else happens, and their seat becomes open, and Trump nominates a Gorsuch-like person or a Brett Kavanaugh, it's going to be, as I say, nuclear war. But would it be if it were Kennedy? Would it be as intense? Because Kennedy's not thought of as a liberal seat, and the libs think they own those four seats. They are their seats in perpetuity. They are entitled to those four seats. Kennedy's seat is known as one that goes with the flow. He's not known to vote strictly with either side. So there may be something to the strategy here, that the actual way to get a conservative majority on the court would be to not wait for one of the libs to leave, but rather to replace Justice Kennedy here in the wake of replacing Justice Scalia. So no inside knowledge on this, just sharing with you all that is floating out there. They're mentioned a couple days ago, and the day before that, and even yesterday, that, and I asked some of you to call in and react to this, that is there a growing impatience among Trump supporters for what appears to be no movement on repealing Obamacare and tax cuts? And we took some calls on this, and it was not definitive in either way. Most of the people that called support Trump, and so far still do, 100%. And most of them said, hey, it's only day 18, it's only day 19, it's not time to get panicky here. But some have become alarmed. Matt Drudge sent out a couple of tweets, one of them saying the GOP should be sued for fraud because they promised quick repeal of Obamacare and quick action on tax cuts. And what we've had is statements, well, we can't get to Obamacare till at least next year, if then. And tax cuts, well, it's a massive thing to unwind like Obamacare. It's going to be, we're not going to be, and some people say, you're not doing this to us again. There have been some Republican voters, you're not doing this to us again. You told us you needed all three. You need the House, you need the Senate, you need the White House to repeal Obamacare. Well, you've got it. We gave it to you. Action. Let's see some. Same thing on tax cuts. So today, President Trump assured everybody that the big tax cut is coming and that he is on it. And it is not something that has been put on the back burner. It's every bit front and center as it's always been. Rest assured. And the result of this is, from CNBC, stocks have shot through the roof. The Dow Jones Industrial Average reached an all-time high after Trump promises a big league tax announcement. U.S. equities traded higher on Thursday after President Trump said that he would give an announcement regarding taxes in the next few weeks. Lowering the overall tax burden on American business is big league. That's coming along very well. We're way ahead of schedule, I believe, said the president. And we're going to announce something, I would say, over the next 2 or 3 weeks that'll be phenomenal in terms of tax. Trump said this in a meeting with airline executives. Another meeting, by the way, that went exceptionally well. The airline execs left the meeting thinking this was cool. This was really cool. This was great. Everybody having met with Trump comes out of the meeting just singing his praises and thinking it went phenomenally well. And it was in that meeting that Trump made his comments on taxes coming, tax cuts coming. I don't know if his announcement means he's reached an agreement with McConnell and Ryan. If it does, that's great. If it's Trump applying pressure on them, that's also fine, too. But, folks, I can tell you, the House Ways and Means Committee is moving on tax cuts. They've got a tax cut plan ready to go. Kevin Brady is the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, and they're not sitting on their hands in there. Top marginal rate be down to 33%. It features some repatriation of foreign-held assets. There's everything I've been able to detect. There is a clear desire, backed by energy, in the Republican caucus to move these tax cuts forward and to get it done. Same thing with Obamacare. That's a little bit more dicey, but we'll just wait and see. But so far, all good. 19 days, I think this is, into the Trump administration. I'll take a brief timeout. We'll be back here in just a second. Okay, let's go to the audio soundbites with Senator Richard Blumenthal from he's from Connecticut. And this was last night on Capitol Hill. He held a press conference to talk about his meeting with the Supreme Court nominee, Judge Neil Gorsuch.
My strong hope is that he will be more vehement publicly. He certainly expressed to me that he is disheartened by the demoralizing and abhorrent comments made by President Trump about the judiciary.
Well, here's the problem with that. It was Blumenthal talking to Gorsuch, who referred to the president's comments as abhorrent. That word was not used by Gorsuch. And disheartening, and all these are characterizations that others have made in Gorsuch's presence, that he either signals his agreement by not opposing it or whatever. But Gorsuch is not running around the Senate ripping into Trump, is the point. The media wants you to think that Gorsuch is what they really want you to believe. They want you to think Gorsuch is close to pulling himself out of this because he's so disappointed in Trump. That's what they want you to think. They want you to think that Judge Gorsuch is so embarrassed by this bumbling bull in a china shop that he doesn't even want to be associated with this president. And he's on the verge of pulling his own nomination to the Supreme Court. That's what they're trying to convince you. And that's not by any stretch what's happening. The next thing they want you to believe is that after Blumenthal and a couple of others mischaracterize the way Gorsuch is speaking, they want you to believe, I've even seen it speculated, will Trump pull the Gorsuch nomination himself because Gorsuch is not being loyal? Will Trump actually call Gorsuch and say, I'm going to pull your nomination. I don't want some reprobate like you on the court who can't be loyal to me. They want people to believe that might happen. There's no way that's going to happen, folks. And all of this is a reaction to the Democrats and their continual losing. They are unhinged and don't know what to do about it. They have no power, so they've got one or two things they can do. They can lie and try to make it look like they have the power, or they can lie, misstate, mischaracterize, and make it appear that even people on Trump's team are embarrassed by him and don't really want to be part of it anymore. And that's what this is really all about. And none of it's true. Gorsuch is not going to pull his own nomination. Trump's not going to pull it. And Gorsuch is not running around openly criticizing Trump in this way as they want you to believe. And in the case of Blumenthal, this is a guy, he still got elected because doing this kind of stuff's a resume enhancement. He lied openly to the people of this country in North Carolina about his valiant service in Vietnam. He never served in Vietnam. He lied about specifics and having courage and great valor and so forth. March 2nd, 2008 in Norwalk, Connecticut.
We have learned something very important since the days that I served in Vietnam, and you exemplify it. Whatever we think about the war, whatever we call it, Afghanistan or Iraq, we owe our military men and women unconditional support.
He did not serve in Vietnam, and it didn't take long for this to be exposed. Yeah, he wasn't bothered by it. The usual political apology. That's not who I am. That guy that went out there and said, it's not who I am. And if anybody was offended by it, and if any members of the military were insulted, I humbly apologize. Here's a brief montage of drive-by freakout about these non-comments from Gorsuch.
The president's own Supreme Court nominee takes a different view, calling his comments about the judiciary demoralizing and disheartening.
Judge Neil Gorsuch, who's calling the president's harsh words about the courts, quote, demoralizing and disheartening.
The president's comments were, quote, disheartening and demoralizing.
Judge Neil Gorsuch called the president's attack on the judiciary demoralizing and disheartening.
Calling the president's comments about the judge, quote, demoralizing and disheartening.
Gorsuch described President Trump's recent criticism of judges as, quote, demoralizing and disheartening.
Judge Neil Gorsuch using the words demoralizing and disheartening to characterize the president's recent attacks on the judiciary.
He did not use the words abhorrent comments. He was speaking in generalities after such things were said by senators. They're trying to make it look like Gorsuch is having second thoughts. He's embarrassed to be any part of the Trump administration. They're flailing, folks. Be right back. This Blumenthal guy from Connecticut, I'm telling you, is a snake. Gorsuch didn't say hardly anything Blumenthal wants you to think that he said, and the media then jumps on and says. They just continue to lose. Trump now meeting with some Democrat senators on the Gorsuch nomination. Wait till that picture gets out. I'll tell you, folks, I'm struggling here to maintain my composure. CNN actually just had a headline up, Jeff Sessions soon to arrive at his Department of Justice office. They're quaking in fear. They had a panel. They had two people assembled to discuss Jeff Sessions arriving at work. They're literally panicked and in fear. Oh, my God, Jeff Sessions is going to get to his office soon. What then? You mean he's really going to be Attorney General? You mean he's really going to do stuff? Oh, no. Greetings and welcome back, folks. Great to have you. Rush Limbaugh behind the golden EIB microphone at 800-282-2882. The email address lrushbo@eibnet.us. Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, the senator, just one more thing on this. He's out there asking questions of Gorsuch, and Gorsuch doesn't say anything. And it gets characterized as Gorsuch agreeing. And here's an example from it's going to scroll out of view if somebody doesn't stop real soon. It's talking to thehill.com. And I said to him, this is Blumenthal. I said to him, if a litigant before your court, and the president of the United States is in fact a litigant right now in the immigration ban cases, I asked Judge Gorsuch, would you hold him in contempt of court? Blumenthal said, adding that Gorsuch did not have a response to that comment. Well, why didn't Blumenthal claim that Gorsuch didn't disagree with him on that point, too? After all, he didn't say anything. And yet everybody's out reporting here that Gorsuch is out trashing Trump for what he said about Judge Robart. And look, to the extent that Gorsuch is behaving the way he is, he's giving the left less and less reason to oppose him. Less and less, in a public sense. I mean, with this stuff being reported, Trump doesn't care. Everybody thinks Trump's ego is so fragile that if Gorsuch actually would go out there and say that I am very disheartened by what President Trump is doing, there are people that think Trump would be so mad that he would call Gorsuch and fire him before he even got to the Supreme Court. They literally believe this. There are some people who literally believe that Trump would sabotage himself in that way. That would not happen, but they want people to believe it. The idea that they are now reporting that Gorsuch is of a frame of mind that Trump's criticism of the judge is disheartening, all that's going to do is help Gorsuch in the immediate battle ahead, and that is his confirmation. And that's the objective here. Get confirmed, and then after that, none of this matters, because he's on the court for as long as he wants to stay. It's a lifetime appointment. So I watch all this, and it falls into the same category. You have a bunch of establishment types who are continuing to go after Trump and his administration and everything he does in the way Republicans have always been attacked, sometimes successfully. But it doesn't apply to Trump. It just doesn't work, and they still haven't been able to get it through their heads that there's an entirely different animal in town and in Washington. And the real impetus here, or the real thing to know, is they still don't understand who elected Trump. And this is, to me, fascinating. I mean, these are people, you look at the media and you look at the Democrats, it's their business. I mean, they have to get ratings in one sense, votes in another. It's their business to understand, in one case, audience, and in the next case, voters. And in both instances, the media and the Democrats have contempt for a majority of Americans who voted for Donald Trump. And so there is no effort made to reach out to them. There's no effort made to try to understand who they are. There's no real effort made to understand why they voted for Trump. There isn't any effort made to understand why they give Trump such a wide berth. They don't care to learn any of this. They just condemn it as it happens, and they think that their condemnation will eventually persuade people to leave Trump or to abandon Trump or to lose their vigorous support for Trump. That's not going to happen. Only Trump can do that. It was the same way during the campaign. As hard as people were trying to separate Trump from his voters, they weren't going to be able to do it. And you know why? It's the same old saw. The media didn't make Trump, and the Republican Party didn't make Trump. Trump made Trump. Now, if the media happens to make you, by that I mean if you are who you are because the media has sung your praises and done a series of soft soap profiles, if the media treats you as a godlike figure, and that's why you're famous, well, the media can destroy you the next day if they want to. All they have to do is change the way they cover you. And if the Republican Party is responsible for your success, let's say you're a newly elected freshman from Battle Creek, and you want to rise the ladder of success in the House of Representatives, and the Republican Party helps you do that, and then you go against the leadership, they can take everything away from you that they gave you and destroy your political future. But if you get there on your own, as Trump has, the media can try all they want, and they're not going to be able to separate Trump's voters from Trump. And the Republican Party is not going to be able to do that either. Only Trump can. But even with all that, you would think CNN, I mean, they clearly want to have an audience. Look at Hollywood. They clearly want to have an audience. They want to have box office, but Hollywood's losing box office. ESPN's losing subscribers. CNN, for all that people talk about it, doesn't really have an audience, particularly when you compare it to the Fox News audience. I mean, they're on in all the airports. They're in places where it appears they have a sizable audience, but if you look at the actual numbers, they don't. And they hold in contempt the people who represent an opportunity to grow the audience. Hollywood holds in contempt the people who represent the opportunity to increase box office sales. And the Democrat Party holds in contempt now white working class voters. They abandoned them in November of 2011, and instead the Democrat Party is trying to get where it wants to go on this belief that the white majority is soon not going to be a white majority. It's going to be the minority. And so the Democrats have already thrown in with who they think the combination next majority is going to be, a coalition of a bunch of different minorities now. The problem is the white majority is still the majority. They're still 77% of the country. There's still a long time to go before the white majority isn't the majority anymore. But they're already acting like the white majority's days are over and done with. And they hold them in contempt at the same time. And so all of this that you see with Gorsuch supposedly distasteful about what Trump is saying, it all comes under the umbrella that since they find Trump objectionable, and since they find Trump unacceptable, since they find Trump embarrassing, that everybody who matters does too. And that's simply not the case. A majority of Americans, even if there are strains of people that find things that Trump does unsettling, they're not ready to abandon him yet, because overriding all of this is policy. And I'm going to tell you what the number one policy continues to be. And this is where everybody on this executive order is blowing it and missing it. The number one issue, and you're never going to have this represented honestly, because the people that report on it and the Democrat Party don't agree with it and don't believe it, but the number one issue is immigration. Immigration still to this day represents the greatest threat to this country remaining what it is. That has not changed. Donald Trump is the only person in the American political spectrum who's on record as wanting to change it, to stop it, to redirect it. And as such, his support is unwavering. And this executive order is not redounding negatively to him, much as the drive-bys would love you to believe that it is, and much as the Democrats would hope that it is, and much as Judge Robart would think he's actually going to be able to destroy Trump's efforts here. The simple fact of the matter is people support, and there's polling data even now to back this up, that people support Trump's efforts here in this executive order, and that they're not happy with Judge Robart, and that they're not happy with the judiciary here that's piling on, because it represents illegal immigration and wanton refugees coming into the country unvetted. Represents, it's kind of like this, folks. It's like climate change has everything in it that the left wants and loves in one issue. Everything, or the vast majority of everything they need to get where they want, is in that issue. Climate change as an issue, and then the supposed things necessary to deal with it is a cornucopia. It's a picnic basket of goodies. Immigration represents much the same thing to people that do not like America, to people that have a problem with America, to people who think America is unjust and immoral from the days of our founding, to the people who think America is the problem in the world, to people who think that America is why there's poverty in the world because we've stolen so many other countries' resources, or what have you. Immigration. Open borders is the simplest, fastest way to cut this country down. Immigration, open borders, unvetted mass illegal immigration is the fastest way to end America as founded. If we're going to let endless numbers of people in, and we're not going to assimilate them, and we're not going to stand for what's always been a distinct American culture, and the people that voted for Donald Trump know this, they are frightened by it, and they can clearly see that the Democrats don't care. In fact, the Democrats seem to support that, and their friends in the judiciary seem to support that policy of open borders and let anybody in on the basis that we owe it to the world to let everybody have some of our prosperity, because it's not fair that we are the only ones that have such prosperity. We must share it because we've destroyed it for so many others. And Trump ran on this notion of stopping this illegal immigration and rekindling some assimilation, and he's the only one who did, prominently. And now that the Democrats and the media are aligned against him in this area, and now apparently a couple of judges, Trump's supporters are rallying to him even more. May not be reported in polling data, because the drive-bys don't want to believe it. They want to believe they're successfully driving a wedge between Trump supporters and Trump. And they think they can do it with all these protests. All these protests show that people are unhappy with Trump. And Elizabeth Warren going bat nuts on the Senate floor, that shows people unhappy with Trump. And the NAACP, the Congressional Black Caucasians, marching on the Senate to oppose Sessions, that shows Americans are unhappy with Trump. And all of these people opposing the border control who are trying to deport illegal aliens, that shows people are unhappy with Trump. The whole point of everything in the news that you see, everything is designed to make you think that the country regrets electing Trump, that they're unhappy with Trump, that they don't support anything Trump is doing. But the people that voted for Trump are not buying it. They're not of that frame of mind. And they are still every bit behind him as they were. Where is this Bill Kristol story? You know what? I'm going to find it, take a break. I don't know what to make of this Kristol story. I had it here prominently. He retired from the Weekly Standard, and he went and made a... Was it Brookings AEI? Where did he... I'll find it during the break. I'm not so sure he meant this, but there are others... Well, I mean, he might have been facetious. He might have... I'm not sure. But what he basically said was that he agrees with John Adams that after 2 or 3 generations of successful capitalism in our society, what you end up with is so much prosperity that people get lazy and they sit around and they don't work anymore and they've learned to pay themselves benefits, and that you need immigration. You need people who are poor from other parts of the country who want to get wealthy, who want to get rich, who want to move ahead in life in order to keep the country moving, because the white majority gets fat, dumb, happy, and lazy. There are people, and even on our side, who believe that. Some of the open borders people do believe that. Let me find it. I'll be back here in just a second. Okay, apparently Bill Kristol's still the editor at the Weekly Standard. I thought he retired from something. I thought I read something not long ago he retired. Maybe regular to writing, or maybe I read it about somebody else. Anyway, he was at the American Enterprise Institute on Tuesday in a seminar with Charles Murray. Charles Murray has a new book called Coming Apart. Well, it's not a new book. It's a book called Coming Apart. And it focuses on the cultural separation between the wealthiest and most educated white Americans and the poorest and least educated white Americans. It's about the white majority, but the divisions within the white majority based on economic lines, if you will. And Kristol, at the seminar with Charles Murray, said, look, to be totally honest, if things are so bad, as you say, with the white working class, don't you want to get new Americans in? Which, of course, is a provocative question. He says to Murray, well, look, if things are that bad with the white working class, if they're that poor and if they are that, shall we say, estranged, wouldn't you want to get some new Americans in? And before delving into the theory about replacing the white working class, Kristol said that he hopes, quote, this thing isn't being videotaped or ever shown anywhere. Whatever tiny, pathetic future I have is going to totally collapse. It's being funny and facetious there. He said you can make a case that America has been great because I think John Adams said this. Basically, if you're in a free society, a capitalist society, after 2 or 3 generations of hard work, everybody becomes kind of decadent, lazy, spoiled, whatever. And then luckily you have these waves of people coming in from Italy, from Ireland, Russia, and New Mexico, now Mexico, who really want to work hard, really want to succeed, really want their kids to live better lives than they did. And they aren't sort of clipping coupons or hoping they can hang on and meanwhile grow up as spoiled kids and so forth. In that respect, I don't know how this moment is that different from the early 20th century. Well, the debate is on over whether Bill Kristol was serious here, whether he was being facetious, whether he was being sarcastic to be funny to make a point. Well, but I think you have to look at Bill Kristol. If you put yourself in his shoes, he's not winning much. Hated Trump, Trump wins. Trump's not conservative as these people think they are conservative. Trump wins. Bill might be part of that group that sees everything they spent their life working for going down the tubes here. So being bitter, suspicious, comical, what might fit in that circumstance. I don't want to characterize it because I don't know. When I saw the story, I've never heard Kristol say anything like this. That doesn't mean I know people who do think this way. I know Republican elites who think this way, but I've never heard Bill Kristol say anything like this. So it basically says that in the late 1800s and early 1900s, Americans had got fat, dumb, and happy because we had had a post-Civil War boom and so forth. And we had no income tax, and so the robber barons and their families were getting wealthy and wealthier and wealthier, clipping coupons and not working, and then future generation not working. And we needed people to come in and replace them, start doing work. And hence we had massive immigration from Ireland, from Italy. And we shut it down in 1921 so that all those people could assimilate. But that's the difference. I mean, if you really want to compare immigration from Europe, Southern Europe and Western Europe, in the late 1800s to the early 1900s to today, there's a stark difference, and that is that many, not all, but many of the immigrants, the illegal immigrants, are not making any effort to assimilate and become quote-unquote Americans, what all of them did in that era. Okay, back to the phones. Nope, not back. We haven't been yet. We're going to start on the phones here. Give Wendy something to do in there. Here is Rob in Detroit. Glad you called, sir, and I appreciate your patience in holding on. How are you?
Good, sir. Ditto's Rush. I just wanted to state the obvious. The judiciary is only a co-equal branch of government. We can call the president an ass. We can call congressmen and senators an ass. Why can't we call judges an ass?
Well, because judges are supposedly not political. Judges are an independent branch, and they're supposed to be immune from the political process, immune from political pressures. They serve for life, and they were given lifetime appointments precisely so they would not have to campaign for re-election, so they would be immune from the daily zeitgeist, the spirit of the times. That's why, traditionally, you don't attack the judges.
But we know that's not true, Rush. We know they are political.
Well, I'm just telling you what the conventional wisdom has always been about not attacking. I'm not arguing that they're independent. They're a bunch of judges have become political hacks way too many times here.
All right. Well, I think we should call a spade, and I think you should definitely call this cat out, this Robart cat, and Trump should call him out every chance he gets.
That's my point. As a Trump supporter, everything's fine. Robart's an ass. Say so. Quote caller, Rush Limbaugh program 133 on February 9th, 2017. Robart's an ass. Say so. Caller, Trump supporter. That's exactly my point. This is what Trump supporters think. And Robart did not rule on the law. Go back and read what Robart said. Read his ruling. You won't find any legal analysis. You won't find any discovery that Trump's executive order violates the Constitution. You'll find this guy, well, I don't know how many people from these 7 countries have committed terrorism acts. I don't think any. I don't think there have been any. Well, fine. That's not a legal basis to make a ruling. Anyway, he's wrong about that, too. There have been 24 different instances of people from those 7 countries who have been apprehended, suspected, what have you. But it's an interesting subject, this business of not criticizing judges. Let me give you a real-world example. Trump has gone after the judges on the Ninth Circuit after the oral argument, which he either listened to or aides listened to and reported to him, because they streamed it. They made it they took oral arguments on the phone. I mean, the Ninth Circuit's out in San Francisco, and the litigants were in the state of Washington and Washington, D.C. So they're on the phone doing this, and they streamed it. And after Trump heard it, he tweets out, I'm not saying they're biased, but it's so political. Wrong. That was his tweet. So political. Bad. Whatever. So political. And that's his assessment. Now, the one reaction to that was, Mr. President, you're forcing their hand. You can't openly criticize them, because now if they find for you, it makes it look like they buckled to you, and they don't want that. So, Mr. President, you're almost forcing them to rule against you just to show their independence. That's what some people said. Mr. President, just don't say anything. Just let the ruling happen and then go after them if you want to, but don't characterize them beforehand, because you're really limiting, because they're human beings. And, judges, folks, I mean, I have a family of them. The good ones take it very seriously, and they do not want anybody to think that their opinions can in any way be, quote unquote, purchased or influenced or secured. So if you start attacking them before, now I know, look, I know what you're saying, but Rush, people criticize the Supreme Court before their rulings all the time. I know there's all kinds of political pressure. I know. But this is a specific ruling that is imminent, like within days. And it's not a Supreme Court decision that's months and months away. The bottom line is, we have always been told that the Supreme Court in this does not follow elections, meaning they pay no attention to public opinion. This is what we're told. But I've always had a problem with that, because they're human beings. They're human beings, and some of them want to be publicly respected. Some of them, look at the 4 justices on the Supreme Court, that it doesn't matter. Whatever the Democrat Party agenda is, that's their vote, and they are in lockstep. And to say that they are deciding these cases on the merits of the law, you can blow holes through that with these 4. Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan. And before that, their replacements. I mean, they literally vote lockstep on the Democrat Party agenda. Whatever the case is, if the Democrat Party agenda is attached to it, you know what they're going to do. And no amount of criticizing them changes it, beforehand or afterwards. I'm not opposed to criticizing judges. I don't think they're gods. I don't think their branch of government's more special than any other. In fact, I would argue that the Supreme Court's become something it was never intended to be. Who set the Supreme Court? 9 people in black robes as the final authority on any issue. They did. Exactly right. That's exactly right. Marbury versus Madison, when the Supreme Court decided, you know what, we're going to sit here and say what's constitutional and what isn't. We just decided that we're going to do that. And so, precedent being inviolable, this is what has evolved. And it's always bothered me, because even low information people now look at the Supreme Court that way, as the final authority. Congress can, yes, Congress, if the Congress wanted the Supreme Court to have 13 seats, they could do it. Congress's role, constitutional, is the setup, not the operation of, obviously, but the establishment of the judicial system, setting up the districts, the appellate districts, the state districts, and so forth. The federal districts within the states. Congress does all that, yes. If they wanted to leave it at 8 seats, they could. If they wanted to break up the Ninth Circuit, they could. If they wanted to, make it 2 circuits, Northern California being one, put all the county libs in that one, and then put your Orange County contingency in the other one. Yes, to answer your question, they could. But every since this has evolved, it becomes almost an unstated part in every bit of legislation. Look at campaign finance. I'll tell you how this manifests itself. Campaign finance laws, something we owe to Senator McCain. Campaign finance, which is violation of free speech, because speech is money. Now, the left hates that, but it is. For people who do not have a microphone, for people who do not have a congressional seat or an elective seat, money becomes the proxy for their speech. If they can't be heard by going out on the street and telling people what they think, they go buy commercials on TV and radio to get their word out. That's free speech. Money is speech because money becomes a proxy for speech. Well, McCain and others in Congress didn't like it. The incumbents were all in favor of campaign finance reform because it was basically, campaign finance reform was the Incumbency Never Loses Act. Campaign finance reform made it harder and harder and harder for challengers to compete with incumbents by putting limits on how much money and where it could come from. And that's what was big about Citizens United, because Citizens United, this Supreme Court, made it possible for corporations, which of course aren't people, as we've heard, to participate in the political process by making donations. The left hates it. They despise it because it takes away an advantage. That's really why they hate DeVos, too. The teachers' union is some of the biggest source of campaign money, and, of course, the intellectual hold they have over the inculcation of young minds. But I digress. Everybody knew that campaign finance reform, as written, was unconstitutional, and it should not have passed, and it did, and it came before George W. Bush to sign it. Everybody said, veto it, Mr. President, veto it. He said, no, I'll leave it up to the court. Well, the court will never find this constitutional. Well, the problem is they did. So what happens? Legislation gets written that is questionably constitutional or is inarguably political in some way, and it's written in such a way as to pass constitutional muster because that's where it's going to end up being finally judged as legal or not. And it affects the way things happen, the way things are done, written, and it also encourages cowardice at various levels of the legislative branch because they can defer. Well, no. Well, the court will take care of this. But nobody can ever predict which way the court is going to go on anything. And campaign finance reform, everybody thought that they would find it unconstitutional. Obamacare, everybody thought this idea that the federal government was mandating that every American buy a product, i.e. health insurance, that's clearly unconstitutional. It's in the Fourth Amendment. You cannot make the American people buy a product. You can recommend it, like Kelly Conway recommending Ivanka Trump fashions, but you cannot make somebody do it. And that was clearly unconstitutional. And in the original, when we had the reading for Obamacare, and Judge Roberts, Supreme Court, the Chief Justice, if you remember that day, the first 30 seconds, when people got their hands on the decision, the first 30, the word unconstitutional was in there. Mandate was unconstitutional. And I remember the original reports on the Supreme Court decision on Obamacare, media and everybody flashing the word, they found it unconstitutional. They found it except after people kept reading, they found out that Roberts himself rewrote some of it in the form of reanalyzing some of it and turned the mandate into a tax. Instead of saying that people were mandated to buy health insurance, Chief Justice Roberts essentially interpreted it as the law requiring people to be, or the government having the legal ability to tax people in order to provide health care for everybody. And so what was unconstitutional became constitutional because of the reworking of the legislation by the Supreme Court. So, These arguments have been going on for the longest time. And it's all rooted today in whether or not we should be able to publicly condemn judges or not. And it just depends. When Obama criticizes the court to their face, State of the Union for Citizens United, he's applauded. It's a gutsy move. It was very courageous, and the president standing firm on one of his beliefs. When Trump sends out a tweet about Robar, no, you can't do that. Our republic was teetering in a balance anyway. We're hanging by a thread, and you go out and do that. So it just depends on who does it, and then who's sitting in judgment of all of it. And we go back to the phones. This is Melissa in Peoria, Illinois. Welcome to the EIB Network. Hi.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call.
Yes, ma'am.
A thought that I've had in the past kind of came up again yesterday when you made the comment about the Harvard study and about the millennials living at home and unemployed. It kind of ties into what you're saying today, and you're talking about Americans being lazy. And
wait a minute. That is not me.
Right. Okay. You are correct on that. And talking about immigrants replacing American workers, what I'm worried about is when Trump creates all these jobs for us, and I'm confident that he will, millennials not wanting to work.
Okay, I'm trying to remember what the details of that Harvard. I remember the story. I just don't remember the stats, the numbers.
It was like 96%, I think, of millennials living at home or unemployed.
I'll have to find this during it's my fault. I should have noticed your call up there long ago and found it and been prepped for you, but I didn't have a chance to look.
Well, I just love how it ties in with what you were just saying about immigrants, because we have immigrants that want to work, and they're willing to work for wages that I'm worried that the American people don't want to.
Yeah, but for me to address this, I've got that number 96% is not what I remember. I remember vaguely the Harvard study on millennials, but I don't remember the specifics of it.
Right.
And I need to have that in front of me, so I have those actual facts and numbers before I can make the connection that you're making here.
I guess it's not so much necessarily the statistics. It's just more this attitude of entitlement and maybe not wanting to work even when these jobs are created.
Yeah, Melissa, here's what it was. It was a study out of Berlin, and it was 92% of protesters live at home.
Okay, thank you.
92% of protesters live at home and are unemployed. And I said, I'll bet you the numbers are similar here. It's not millennials. It was protesters. Okay. Now, many of the protesters in America are working. They are paid by donations from people like George Soros. This is an important point to understand. They're not just rising up in organic, indignant rage and anger. They're being paid and organized, a surprisingly large number of them. Anyway, I get your point. Trump is working with companies to bring jobs back, reopen plants, creating. You're worried there aren't enough people that actually want to work in America anymore to fill those jobs, versus we do have a segment, a percentage of people immigrating to this country do indeed want to become Americans. That's why that's called legal immigration. Nobody's opposed to legal immigration. The whole immigration battle has descended into the left trying to tell people that we are opposed to any immigration, which is not the case, and that we're opposed to it for racist reasons and bigoted reasons. Everybody's for legal immigration, and in the process of legal immigration, you find out who wants to be here and why and what their abilities are. Every nation has total authority on who gets in. And if you look around Europe, they're way ahead of us on this. You have much more support for Trump policy as expressed by polls over there than you would believe, because they're living the disaster. 92% of left-wing activists in Berlin live with their parents, and 1/3 of them are unemployed. And I speculated that it's probably close to that here. We have more. Don't go away. Meeting and surpassing all audience expectations every day. Rush Limbaugh. America's real anchorman, America's truth detector, and the doctor of democracy. And the most talked about radio talk show and host in the country. 800-282-2882 if you want to be on the program. The email address, rushbo at eibnet.us. It's something it's in NBC News, but I haven't seen this anywhere other than on their website. Majority in leading European Union nations support Trump-style travel ban. A majority of Europeans would support a Trump-style ban on further immigration from primarily Muslim countries, according to a poll of more than 10,000 people in 10 countries. An average of 55% of those surveyed for the London-based think tank Chatham House agreed that immigration from Muslim-majority countries should be halted. I was talking about this right before the end of the previous hour. And I said, these people are way ahead of us. They've seen their countries overrun. Germany, Switzerland, you've seen, all of the United Kingdom, they have been overrun by illegal immigration and refugees from predominantly Muslim and Middle Eastern war-torn regions. And when it happened, their elites welcomed people in just like the elites in this country want the same thing to happen here. And they didn't do much to oppose it and stop it because they were, for the most part, these populations are good little socialist populations. They trust their government. They think everybody's looking out for everybody. And they see what's happened here. And they now, when they see what President Trump did, they wished it would happen in their country. They are ahead of us because what Trump is trying to do is make sure that what has happened in Europe does not happen here. Now, it's interesting. You asked the question, and we're back to it again. Why would people be in support of this? Does it strike anybody that on 9/11, when there were 19 militant Islamic hijackers who flew 3 airplanes that crashed and 3,000 Americans were killed, does it strike anybody that from that day forward, the elites and many of the leaders in the United Nations and in this country moved into high gear to defend Islam and Muslim countries and militant Islamic extremism, which to me is the exact opposite of what should have happened given human nature. And by human nature, I mean common sense. This has always amazed me that since 9/11, rather than, if 19 people kill 3,000 Americans the way they did, that'd be all the information you need to kind of get the idea that what's in the future, unless you were vigilant. And instead, our State Department started doing seminars on why do they hate us? Why is it our fault? What did we do to cause this? And then it became, we were told, it's our support for Israel when you get right down to it, Mr. Limbaugh. Militant Islam hates us because of our support for Israel. Yeah, okay, maybe that's what we were told, and maybe that's a factor, but it's certainly about much more than that. It's simply that we exist, that we are infidels. Look, I'm not trying to restate old history. I've always been confused, just in the strict common sense. Why in the world have we gone out of our way to be welcoming to the people that did this? That's what I have never understood. And whenever anybody has suggested vigilance and preparedness against further attacks like this, those people have been called bigots and racists or anti-Muslim, and we've always been told to guard against Muslim backlash against Muslims. And it was almost immediate. The defense of Islam and militant Islamic extremism even reached a fevered pitch after that attack. And it's never made sense to me since. So we've got, at the time that's going on, we have open borders, illegal immigration. People from the southern hemisphere, Central America, are pouring into the United States as wished and desired by the Democrat Party. Any attempt to stop it, get control over it, is called racism and bigotry as well. And now, in Europe, the immigration and refugee status is primarily militant Islamic extremists. And we're all told, shut up, don't comment. We need to be bigger than they and let it all happen. It's defied common sense. Every bit of it has defied common sense. And now, when the president wants to do what he promised to do during the campaign and have a vetting system that's a little bit better than what we've had, and have a temporary moratorium trying to make sure we do not make the mistake of letting the wrong people in, all hell breaks loose. It's an utter violation of all common sense to me. And the same thing with illegal immigration. Nobody's opposed to legal immigration. We're all for legal immigration with a proper vetting that we've always engaged in. But there are people that want the borders of this country wide open for anybody. Now we're dealing with the idea, well, we got a bunch of lazy middle class and lower middle class, white working class people, and they don't want to work anymore. And we need people to come in and do these jobs. So it's kind of a variation on the old saw that there are jobs Americans won't do anymore. Seems like that's now undergoing a change. It's not jobs Americans won't do anymore. It's lazy Americans who have grown fat, dumb, and happy after years and years and years of prosperity. And we need eager beavers who have not yet become wealthy to come into this country and do the work they won't do. And when you look at it from afar, or even nearby, when you look at it close up, it's clear what's happening. And that is an effort is underway to fully transform this country away from the principles, traditions, and institutions of its founding. And the people in the last election rose up against that. And so now the battle is joined, and Trump is doing what he can to follow through on his campaign promises. And the people that supported him are sticking with him. But the effort to continue what was going on is in full speed. But the common sense of it it's never made common sense to me. Common sense would be if 19 people kill 3,000 of your fellow citizens, that you would be on guard for the same kind of thing happening. And instead, we've gone the other way. Well, it's more than it's our fault. Our fault, that's just a common left-wing reaction to it. There's an active desire. My point is an active desire to undermine all of these Western civilized democracies. There is an ongoing effort to undermine all of them. Here, Western Europe, you name it. Which takes me, it's not totally related, but I had this story yesterday, and I didn't get to it. It's a Wall Street Journal story. Well, it's actually not a Wall Street Journal story. It's a Bloomberg story based on an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal by James A. Baker and George Shultz. Now, these two guys date back to the Republican Reagan administration. They are considered Republican royalty. They are called, even by the drive-bys, they have so much respect now. They're called elder statesmen in the Republican Party. And according to the drive-bys Democrats, the Republicans don't have any statesmen, period. But these two guys have written an op-ed pushing a carbon tax. And they had a meeting with Trump officials in the White House to push a carbon tax. A group of prominent Republicans and business leaders, including former Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson and James Baker, will meet with some of Trump's top advisors at the White House. It actually took place yesterday, to push a plan to tax carbon dioxide in exchange for lifting a slew of environmental regulations. a tax on carbon dioxide. We exhale carbon dioxide. A carbon tax. Unlike the current cumbersome regulatory approach, a levy on emissions would free companies to find the most efficient way to reduce their carbon footprint, said James Baker and George Shultz in a Wall Street Journal opinion article on late Tuesday. A sensibly priced, gradually rising carbon tax would send a powerful market signal to businesses that want certainty when planning for the future. The proponents are set to formally announce their proposal Wednesday, which they did at the National Press Club, lending their stature to an approach for addressing climate change that mirrors an idea already advanced by ExxonMobil. The self-dubbed Climate Leadership Council, pushing the framework, says that a carbon tax is necessary to respond to, quote, mounting evidence of climate change that is growing too strong to ignore, close quote. Folks, James Baker and George Shultz, Republican royalty, now on board with this whole idea that there is man-made climate change that we've got to get ahead of. There's mounting evidence growing too strong to ignore, and we need a carbon tax. We need a worldwide, this is the key to it, a worldwide carbon tax administered by the United Nations. And they're talking about 20%. A carbon tax is a tax on every fossil fuel there is and any emission deriving therefrom. It is an endless way to separate people from their money. And all you have to do to incur it is live. You cannot go through your life without using carbon. We are carbon. The human body is carbon. I first heard of a carbon tax, and I'm sure it predates this. I first heard it was one of the first things Bill Clinton proposed after he was inaugurated in 1993. But why this is news that these are the most prominent Republicans to get on board this whole idea that there is now mounting evidence. I'm telling you, this is a worldwide effort that has a worldwide taxation purpose. And the thing about a global tax, one that's administered by the UN and that every citizen in the world, for give and take a few, is forced to pay, that kind of tax is never undone. That kind of tax is never repealed. And these regulations that they claim they want to get rid of, that never happens either. Oh, they might get rid of some regulations at first, but they'll be back. The regulations will be back because that's just the way bureaucracies work. I read this. I was beside myself in shock. I was surprised. I guess I shouldn't have been. But the idea that this is no way to address climate change. In fact, there is no way to address climate. What does addressing climate change mean? How come raising taxes has anything to do with climate change? How in the world can it? This, to me, is further evidence of the hoax of all of this. The idea that what really this is all about, as most everything to do with left-wing politics is separating you from your money. Standing in the way of you accruing and acquiring wealth. That's what the income tax is. Now this, all under this umbrella of saving the planet. Dire consequences. We can't afford to take the chance that we're wrong. We must assume that we are right and begin immediately on the steps necessary to save the planet. And step number one is a tax increase. If this doesn't lay bare the entire phony hoax nature of all this, I don't know what would. Now, admittedly, the plan, it's right here from the story, plan faces strong political headwinds. Both Trump and a majority of House of Representatives have come out against a carbon tax in the past year. Trump has pledged to do away with environmental regulations limiting emissions of carbon dioxide without a carbon tax. But the idea of a carbon tax, long favored by economists as the most straightforward way to address climate change, could gain traction as part of a broad tax overhaul on Capitol Hill. The thing is, it's not a climate proposal. It's a tax proposal. It's a tax increase that is disguised as something that's going to save the planet. It's hideous. Thomas Pyle, head of the free market advocacy group American Energy Alliance, said this is not a climate proposal, it's a tax proposal. There is no need to trade Obama's climate regulations for a carbon tax. Donald Trump's already promised to undo them anyway without a tax. But they got into the White House and they had a meeting. It wasn't with Trump, but with Trump officials. Now, a lot of people have gotten in there. You know, and Trump went and talked to the New York Times, and he told them what they wanted to hear on climate change. But when he left, he had not changed. So I'm not worried about that. I'm just the all-court press now. The full court press is on, with Republican royalty now joining this. And these people, by the way, are all involved in the oil industry. I got to take a quick time out, my friends. There's time just zooming by. Back right after this. No. Let me put it this way. I don't ever want to be confusing. Folks, we allowed more Muslims to settle here in the United States in the 10 years after 9/11 than we did in the 10 years prior to it. That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. We acted guilty and responsible after 9/11. It doesn't make any sense. That's all I'm saying. We acted like we had done something wrong, or that we had to prove that we harbored no animosity. We were attacked. It just never made any sense to me, and it still doesn't. We don't need Saudi Arabia's oil today as much as we did because of fracking. So common sense-wise, it makes no sense. But there is a reason for it, and if you have information, if you know what's going on, that reason would make sense if you know the motivations of the people involved. But just on the surface, their common sense, why do we act like we were responsible? Why do we act like we had to do something to show our sorrow? It never made any sense to me. It still doesn't. Now, in this story on prominent Republicans pushing carbon tax, listen to this one sentence. But the idea of a carbon tax, long favored by economists as the most straightforward way to address climate change. What in the name of Sam Hill do economists have to do with addressing climate change? Don't think these words are not carefully chosen. Addressing climate change is not dealing with it. Addressing climate change is not attacking it. Addressing climate change is not fixing it, solving it, or what have you. And why does it matter what economists think as the most straightforward way to address climate change? And as part of this proposal, $300 billion of the tax collected would be redistributed to households in the form of checks, quarterly checks from Social Security. So the poor, a family of four qualifying, would see an average annual payout of $2,000 from this tax increase. Greetings and welcome back, El Rushmo. Let me ask you a question, folks. Let's say that we get the carbon tax. We don't want it. We better not get it, but let's go down the road. We get the carbon tax, 20% carbon tax. Do you think that would end all talk of climate change? No, it wouldn't. What does that mean? It means this is bogus. Economists agree that a carbon tax is the most sensible way to address climate change. Right. Okay, so people are going to think, carbon tax, we've fixed global warming. But they're not going to stop whining and moaning about it, and they're not going to stop blaming people for it. And therefore, raising taxes isn't going to matter a hill of beans. All it will do will be address climate change. That's a perfectly well-chosen word to obfuscate and confuse. George in DeLand, Florida. I'm glad you called, sir. Thank you for waiting. How are you doing?
Thanks, Rush. Thanks for taking my call. I wanted to ask you need to begin to understand the media and why they're unhinged. You really need to go back decades, Rush. Before Rush Limbaugh, conservative radio, and Fox News, my question is, what was this fake news effect on American voters before you came along?
Well, there was a monopoly. As recently as August 1st, 1988, when this program started, all we had back then, and to me, 1988 seems like yesterday. To a lot of people, it's the Jurassic Age. But to me, since that was the day I started, 1988 seems like yesterday. And in 1988, we had ABC, CBS, and NBC, and CNN had just started. They'd been 5 years or so in. And that was it. They had a monopoly. They had the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the news on all three of those networks was identical. Oftentimes in the nightly news, the news events would be in the same order. There literally was very little different other than the specials they would do.
So my question is, if you were harmed back then and you have this media that won't tell your story truthfully, what was your recourse? What happened? And I think in my opinion, what happened is we withdraw socially and politically at that time. And before you came along in the conservative radio, that monopoly has caused harm to a lot of people. Now, you come along. Trump has not come along yet. People are getting some courage that, okay, there are some places I can tell my story. But when I went saw Donald Trump at a rally in Daytona Beach, I saw this hope in people's eyes of justice, because now this justice that they were able to see, because the media no longer controls that, and the media today will never change, because if they do, they'll realize that they have affected the lives of millions of people in the last few decades. And
what do you mean
they won't be able to?
What do you mean? What do you mean they'll never change?
Well, they'll realize that they have, they basically have turned themselves into, they victimize not telling the truth when someone's been harmed, like in the military or through borders. By not telling people stories, they've actually helped, because of political gain, they basically have become the victimizer. And so they're not going, if they realize that they've actually caused this harm, and that's why they've basically gone unhinged, because they cannot come to that conclusion that they've actually caused the problems in Syria by not.
Okay, wait a minute. Now you're getting. Let me see if I can translate this. They have a monopoly in 1988. You asked what could people do back then when the media was lying about them. There wasn't much. But again, the media, it's always been left wing. I'm going to say something here that many of you might find, I don't know, profound or shocking or what have you. Look, I remember it. I remember the media back then. It was all left all the time. But it seemed, aside from that, it was benign. And what it took to overcome it was somebody like Ronald Reagan, who was able to go over the heads of the media and speak directly to people without the benefit or the need of the media translating or reporting or deciphering or what have you. Republicans won elections, of course, during this period of time, but during this period of time is when the left began to really entrench itself in the bureaucracy and in all of these nonprofits. They took over the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, you name it, all the Mellon groups. They were taking them over. Nobody saw it. It was nobody's radar. They were embedding themselves in the unelected bureaucracy, and they were well aware of the monopoly they had, and therefore they did a fairly decent job of hiding. They didn't hide the bias, but they hid the agenda. Now, when this program came along in 1988, that was the first assault on this monopoly. And then as this conservative media grew, first with other radio talk shows, locally, then nationally, and then my television show hit for 4 years, and then Fox News hit 3 years after that. And then the internet blew up, and we got blogs and conservative websites, and the magazines that were conservative went online. And there became a full-fledged alternative media. That would be us. And this destroyed the monopoly. The monopoly the media had gave them opportunity for two things: what to report and what to ignore. And what they ignored is what we reported, and that served to expose who they were every bit as much as documenting their bias. The thing that happened as a result of them losing their monopoly, they haven't changed their ideological stripes, but they have thrown away. It's gone now. There is not even a pretense of objectivity. They don't even try to hide behind that anymore. There's no pretense of fairness. It is all out ideological warfare. And so I believe that busting up the liberal monopoly of the news, the drive-by media monopoly, has in part contributed to the, how should I phrase it, the ongoing ideological battles, the partisan divide, because what the alternative media did, was awaken all of the Americans who were not fairly represented in the media. When this program started, practically everybody that called began by saying, thank you, I'm not used to hearing what I think in the media, not nationally. So a bunch of people, average, ordinary Americans, began to have their thoughts, their opinions validated because they were all over national media and on websites and eventually on Fox News. And it gave them confidence and strength, and that's when the battles began. The left and their news monopoly, they lost their contentment. They lost the fact that they were benign. They lost the fact that they owned it just by waking up every day. It became a battle. It became an all-out war. And now I think media is a battleground, just as electoral politics is. And it's not going away anytime soon. It's not going to change. It's part of the evolution of this. And in the process, who the left-wing media is has been fully exposed. Now, there's no doubt they always were what they are now. It's just they were able to hide that for the longest time. But now it is known that they leave media and go to work for a congressman or senator and then go to work for a network and then come back, and it's incestuous. They marry each other in Washington, D.C., and they work at each other's think tanks and so forth. The entire establishment of left-wing media and its related and associated businesses, such as politics, has been exposed. And so it's not nearly as easy for them. Here's the bottom line. They used to own the shaping of public opinion. They owned it. There was no opposition to it, other than what might be local newspapers or in local media, but there was no competition for it. Now it's a battle every day for what they've always been. They've told everybody all these years that all they were doing was reporting the news. They were just out making news. They were not making the news. They were bending, shaping, forming, flaking public opinion. They were advancing the left-wing agenda, which was found in the Democrat Party. They were always doing that. That's what this busting up of their monopoly has exposed, who they've always been. They've sort of been drawn out. And so the partisan nature of things has intensified as a result of their monopoly being blown. I have to be honest about that. I think that's one of the things. We have a 12-year-old young man on the phone from Fort Lauderdale named Ben. Ben, great to have you. How are you doing, sir?
Good. How are you?
Fine and dandy. I'm glad to hear from you.
Hi. I real quick just want to say that I love all your books, and I've read and listened to all of them.
Well, I thank you very much. You've read and listened to all of them. Good for you.
Sir.
Good for you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. So I was wondering if you thought that Trump still would have won the election if he had been less brash and if he cared more about what others thought and said about him.
I do. I even if he had stayed focused on the issues, if his position on the issues had been the same,
yes.
I don't think it would have hurt him at all. But I'll admit that the brashness equals fearlessness, and a lot of people admire that. The brashness equal confidence, and a lot of people not only admire that but need it. But the reason I say this is a lot of people want to take away from Trump. He only won because he appealed to these base instincts of these despicable white working class voters, and that's not the reason Trump got elected. He got elected on issues of substance, and the truth is that his personality quirks did not hurt him. And to some extent, they did help. So, yes, I think he still would have. If he had been as consistent on issues with those behavioral changes, yet no doubt about it, in my mind. Man, we have been all over the place today, folks. These kind of shows, they just don't know where they're going, and you don't know where it's going to end up. So I hope it was okay. Open line Friday tomorrow. Be back locked and loaded. Left hates that. Locked and loaded.
Welcome to